LandryFootball.com as he kind of snuck up on me. Wow, this commercials fly by fast. That means we're back into the content you want. Go ahead and get on board and give us a prediction for the game tonight. And the closest one to the score will win a Hooker t-shirt. I'll let you decide the size because you might not want your wife to wear it, but that's up to you. Chris Landry.
Wow.
What's that?
Wow.
Well, I mean, if it says Hooker across the front, it works for a year.
You want me to wear mine all the time.
But I know you're not a hooker.
Other people don't know that. It's like just advertising. People are like, how much? And I'm like, what? And they're like, oh. I'm like, oh. Ha, 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 ha.
Okay, before I've only lost it like in 25 years on the air like 3 times. So before I do it, I'm going to get serious. Chris Landry of LandryFootball.com joins us now. Chris, a happy game day from Knoxville. How are you?
Happy game day. I feel like I just walked into something like a hornet's nest.
I don't know. I don't know what in the world it is, but that's a game day edition of
game day. How about that? You don't have that very often. On Thursday appearance in a Thursday game. So yeah, it's a good little setup. I was thinking about it with for Tennessee, play on a Thursday and to get what is kind of like a mini open date, meaning you can get some work done and then you get a little time to heal before you go into week 2. I think it's good for them. Obviously if you're going to have a Thursday game, I'd like to have it on the first week where you got plenty of time to prepare. You can start practice early. There's a lot of benefits. So yeah, it's going to be fun to see. I don't know that it'll be an enjoyable game to watch. I don't know how many people are going to, it could be compelled, and Tennessee fans will like it, though. I think it's going to be Ball State's going to have a hard time matching up with them.
Oh, man, wants to jump in here, but Chris, let me start with what do you think of Ball State? Can you give us kind of a thumbnail sketch? Because I looked at them early this morning. I've looked at them throughout the past couple weeks. I don't see them hanging at all.
No, the issue is they really don't have much of a passing game. John Paddock is an athletic guy. He's got some experience. They've got good receivers, but the ability to throw the football is very limited. So that's going to be a problem. In that defensively, that's their strength, but it's not going to be a strength against this Tennessee offense. So what I foresee happening is them having to play from behind. And then if you're Ball State, you got to abandon the run, and I just think that's an issue. Look, Johannes Taylor is really good. Jason Jackson's good MAC players. Carson Steele is a good MAC running back, but I just think this is going to be very, very difficult to keep it competitive. In essence, the way I like to describe it in certain vernaculars is, they can't really compete. Tennessee's going to have to allow them to compete. And we see that happen sometimes. We see teams play sloppy and turn it over in its first game, its second, whatever it is. That could happen because you never know, but that's going to be all up to Tennessee. I think Tennessee will kind of make this game whatever they want to make out of it or whatever they're capable of making out of it.
So what do you expect to see from Hendon Hooker tonight, and how long do you think he'll actually stay in the game?
I expect him to move the offense very effectively. I expect him to have, I'm not worried about numbers. I think they'll be balanced. I think that they'll score a lot of points. I think he's going to play well. How long they play will depend on 2 things. One, do you have the game out of hand? I mean, this is one of the things where, what's a big enough lead to where you want to take the foot off the pedal or at least get some other people some work. 2 is how much work do you want to give? Might say, well, Hendon Hooker's fine, but how much work you want to give some of the frontline guys, and do you want to have him in it? So I just think that I would say, if I was just going to gander, and this is trying to factor in when this game is going to be out of hand, I would say that he's going to start the second half and he's going to play some percentage of the third quarter, maybe half of it, maybe all of it. And again, I think the variable of how much is going to be what I just talked about. If he goes into the fourth quarter, is because it's a 17-point game and, you're not playing well and you're sloppy, you may want to work those guys a little more. So that's kind of how I see it. But I would guess it somewhere mid-third quarter into third quarter is where he might take up a seat.
How do you define success, Chris, from a coach's perspective with Tennessee's defense? How would you define a successful night?
It's how well you execute, how well, obviously, in the run game you fill your gaps, how well you tackle, how well you leverage the outside run, how well you play good technique and pass coverage, how well do you come off the ball in pass rush situations. It's all about what you're teaching, what you have taught, and how well they're executing. Folks, it's not about how many sacks, how many not. I mean, those things are going to be relative to who you're playing. You have to play to a standard of what you want your guys to play. I call this playing through an opponent, meaning you can't look at the results and say, boy, they're really good. Look at how many yards, and look at how many they hit. That's going. All of that tells you is the result of how you were against a given opponent on a given day. What you have to do is see how guys play, how hard they play, the effort, assignment, execution. That's what matters in any game. If you do that, the result will take care of itself. The result will be just that, the result of it. It's just like anything else. You just don't go out and have a good day. It's how you prepare yourself to have a good day. And that's to me where you can come out of a game with a win and think you got something going that you really don't. And sometimes you can play really well and lose a game, and you can feel a little bit more positive about where you're going, even though you feel completely negative about the loss. So in this type of game, I just think it's all about you, and it's all about trying to get better, and it's all about building towards week 2, because you got to build. You got to build some momentum, and you got to go through. What you don't want to have to do is next week's in practice to spend extra time in what we call correction periods.
Correct. That sounds like I spent most of high school going through correction periods.
Well, yeah, no. So what you do is based on film. We struggled with A, B, and C. So we're going to spend extra time in individuals or team to work on that.
Okay.
The more you have to do that, the less you can advance. Think about it in school. I can remember situations where the math teacher would teach something and nobody's getting it. So they have to go back and redo that chapter again. And so it maybe slows you down. Maybe you don't get as far into it. You can only go as far as your weakest link. So if you're struggling in some areas, it may not maybe to the outside appear that, everything's great because we're 3-0, we're 4-0, whatever. But if you're not progressing, then where it's going to show up is against really good opponents. Whereas if you play well, you play sharp, and you build upon it, then you can start, hey, look, they're really doing a good job in all of these areas. Let's add a little bit more on the plate. So now you become a little bit more versatile. You're a little bit more schematically difficult to play against better opponents. Whereas it doesn't do you any good to add more things to the plate if they can't handle the things currently on the plate, is another way to describe it. So that's what I look for in games like this. You can't look at it. And that applies to everybody that's playing this type of an opponent this week. What you're looking for as a coach.
So I know that you are much more in depth at football than a lot of people, considering your background, your experience, and all of that. Is there a point in the game where, especially a game like this, where you go, there's trouble in our defense, even if you can't see it, like even if normal people can't see it? Is there a point where you're watching it and going, that's a weak spot, or that's going to be a problem moving forward against big time opponents?
Great question.
Yes, but Amanda and Dave, you kind of have a feel through practice if you're going to have a problem and you've adjusted. So let's just take it to the game, and you really are struggling. Let's just pick something up. they're really doing a poor job in coverage. Well, what is the problem? You already know physically what your guys can or can't do. If a guy is not a real good coverage guy, he doesn't have the athletic ability to do it, you don't really need this game to know it. You already know it. But here's where, to your point, if you make a lot of assignment errors, then you start thinking, okay, did we give them too much? Are they not picking it up well enough that we need to go simplify it? Which everybody says, oh, simplify it. There you go. The more you simplify, the easier it is for your guys to run, but the easier it is for an opponent to attack. So, yeah, there are times where it's like, we can't get these guys to understand how they've got to stay in their technique a little longer on those deeper routes. And so what you do, even during the course of the game, you try to recognize it and you try to adjust it during the game. But then that's where you make a note of it. You show it in film sessions and you try to spend that extra time in the correction period to fix it. So, it's not a problem. So here's the issue. You can play really sloppy, really poor, but maybe there's different reasons for it. Maybe you didn't work on something enough because you didn't have time to do it, and therefore you understand it. Maybe guys are a little bit dead-legged, and you figure we worked them a little too much, and it doesn't necessarily send a sound alarm that, oh, they were just really sloppy in this game. That's the way it's going to be all year long. You never stay the same. You either get better or you get worse. You may beat every opponent by the same margin. You're never the same, though, because what you're having to do and how you're having to do it's different. So I look at it as constantly teaching, constantly learning, constantly adjusting. But yes, you'll see things and say, "Well, we've got to get a little bit more out of this or that," and you go and say, "Let's go forward and try to put somebody." Either there are two ways you can get better during the football season. Okay. Either get the guys that you're playing better, or you get other guys on your team in the position to play. You get better guys. And if they're better, they probably would have shown it to this point. But sometimes it evolves. I mean, I go back last year. Last year at this time, we were doing this show. It'd be, how good is Joe Milton going to be? What is that going to be like? How good is he? He's the guy. Because everybody was, in Knoxville and everybody, oh, this guy can throw it through a brick wall. And this is good. Perfect for Josh's system. Now, I hate saying this, but because it's after the fact, but at the time doing different radio and talking about it, I never believed in Joe Milton as a good fit because I don't think he gets the ball out time or rhythm or is accurate enough. Well, it showed it in week one, and now all of a sudden they became a different team. So if you looked at the early part of the schedule for Tennessee, you'd think, oh, Mike, this is a problem. I think quarterback's going to be an issue. Then it became a strength. So I think there's always hope.
Yep. Go ahead, man. My apologies.
No, you're fine. I was just clearing my throat.
Chris's appearance brought to you in part by Craft Treats. Want to remind you of Craft Treats. They have the full spectrum CBD treats for your pet, whether it's car ride anxiety or maybe it is storm anxiety like my dog gets. My dog also is getting a little up there like me and Chris. And so he's got some arthritis. He doesn't like jumping up on the bed very much anymore. So we're concerned. We give him Craft Treats and he is taken care of and feels much better. So let me give some people a little bit of insight into Chris. And Chris also is a consultant for NFL teams and college programs. So you talk to an awful lot of coaches. What kind of vibe do you get? I'm not going to ask you specifically the vibe you get from Tennessee's coaches because I wouldn't want you to share anything that you're not comfortable with, but you can. But what kind of vibe do you get from the SEC coaches you talk to about Tennessee?
I think people were impressed with last year. I think there's, it's depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to defensive coaches, they're like, oh, please, these guys are so tough to deal with, and it changes everything we do. We don't see anything quite like it, so we don't practice against that a lot. So we've got to change our communication system because we can't substitute as freely. So they they are a little bit more of God, those guys. Offensive coaches. I mean, no one. I mean, I would say no one looks at them and at this point fears what they do defensively. They feel like they can. I'll say this as a whole, and this was last year, and this year's a different year, and the film will tell you. Is most people felt like we can run on Tennessee and and that's the game plan. We'll just run it offensively and we'll keep their offense off the field as much as possible. And then, there's some teams, the better teams, and we saw that Tennessee really doesn't match up with the elite teams in the league, but the rest of them, I think, match up very well. So it really does depend upon who you are, meaning where they are and who they play against. So if you look at the conference teams, you pretty much can figure out the ones that are kind of at the level of Tennessee, worry about them a little bit more when they're the elite teams, feel like they're in pretty good shape. But I think overall what they're looking at is kind of where they're going to go, how much of a step up they're going to take, what they're going to look like, any adjustments. I think there's a little bit more of a anticipation of, this year they have a little bit more of a feel. They've seen what the offense does and what the defense does as well. So they have a better feel for them now, as you always do when you've got a substantive amount of film to break down. It's when you a little bit familiar with what some of those guys have done, but it's the first year coach that becomes a little bit more challenging to figure out.
Fair point. All right, Chris. If you can, 30 seconds or less, how do you see this game playing out tonight?
I think it'll be maybe a little bit of a feeling out in the first quarter, barring any turnover, sloppy play by Tennessee. And I think it'll be a gradual build. I think they'll probably score some points in the passing game pretty early. I think they'll be able to run it. I'm curious to see how they stay committed to the run. Again, level of competition is not going to be the same throughout the season, but I think that's going to be a part of it. I think they'll have an explosive spurt pretty early. And then, I think it'll be more control in the second half. I don't know. I think getting to 50 is very doable here. I don't know that I see Ball State getting more than 14, 17-ish points. And maybe I'm curious to see if any of those are meaningful points early, to keep the game close. I don't think so, but that's what's great about football, isn't it? You sit there and watch it, you never quite know. But I don't see this being as big of a threat. I don't see anything like a Georgia Southern or anything that's a type of matchup that would cause Tennessee problems. And of course, that's a different Tennessee regime and coaching staff.
Can I ask one question? I'm sorry, before we go. What is it? Because I know a lot of people probably don't get it, and I certainly haven't done my homework enough to know. What's the difference between this team, Ball State, and the team like Georgia Southern, and why should Tennessee fans not fear that outcome?
Well, I think the difference is, kind of the staff. The staff was a lot different in Tennessee. So they were really not communicating well, and defensively they were a mess in terms of assignment. And I think that their ability at Georgia State to run an offense that had a little bit more versatility, they were just better offensively than this Ball State team appears to be to me, with some of their missing pieces. Now, I will say this. If quarterback plays well, they've got a couple of receivers that can score some points. And I think I have to relate it to what they are in the MAC. And they can be kind of a mid-level team in the MAC this year, maybe slightly above, but it's all going to depend on the quarterback position. That's the biggest concern I'd have for them. And so the difference is I don't think there's going to be a lot of plays that Ball State can make on offense. So I don't want people, because I think this game is going to go where Tennessee's defense is going to not give up a lot of points. I would not, get overly excited and go dance and say, the defense at Tennessee's back. This is not a litmus test, that they're going to face through the course of the SEC. I think people know that. But that's the difference. Whereas I think they were a hot mess against Georgia State. Just as a program was going on, they were just completely discombobulated. And it wasn't really that that team was great. It's just Tennessee they were miscommunication, crossing gaps. They were leaving gaps uncovered because assignment-wise, there were two guys in one gap. And all of a sudden you got, heck, the old man like me with a broken foot could have gotten 8 yards on some of those carries. It was just a disaster.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.